In the white halls of Laterano, Liberia are offered a true belonging and gentle dreams, if they accept a halo on their head and the law around their hearts. Rising from the depths, Iger offers technology and power to all nations that submit to their superior management. On our own landship, a young woman's hands tremble, terrified of the very people she wants to reach out to. You once asked if we ever truly saved anyone, disgusted at the lives we'd just ended, and the innocence we've asked our operators to sacrifice to make those corpses of our enemies, of other infected. Now, obviously we have managed to save countless lives, through our medicine, through our logistics networks, and yes, even through filthy backroom deals and open violence. But I don't think that gets to the core of what you were asking, does it? To me, at least, the question is more about, why is saving others so damned complicated? People are suffering, we genuinely want to help, we're strong enough to make a difference. Why are things any more complicated than just doing everything we can and making things better? Where does that go wrong? How does that go wrong? Why do these noble ideals lead to such ugly conflict? Well, I don't have answers, but I do have some thoughts. After the recent events in Laterano, I think it's a good time to dive in. Before all that, though, I want to talk a little bit about Laterano. Just a quick look for context. If you want something really in-depth, I'd recommend to look at my previous reports.
Oh, dear Lord. I pay my taxes on time every month, okay? I need time to run and hide.
Laterano is often called paradise, and I think there are two main reasons why. The resources and their unique culture. On resources, though Laterano is wealthy, it's not massively more wealthy than other nations. Rather, their economy is unique in that they have a lot of wealth given their small size. Mostly this is due to an economy that doesn't produce much at scale, instead focusing on precision machining, luxury, and services that they're uniquely able to supply. It's an economy that allows them to have a nation so small that it has an edge-to-edge internet access, while still having enough sway on the world stage that each and every citizen lives in luxury that makes jealous. It's a situation they've strived to maintain. And just to be clear, it is a unique situation. Like a lot about Laterano, it's not something you can just copy and hope for the same results. There's often a temptation to want and try to imitate the luxury of certain nations or eras by just cherry-picking bits of policy, without really thinking about what makes those policies feasible to begin with. Contrast their situation with Kierag, that's currently walking the tightrope between maintaining the wealth and independence of its nation, or stabilizes itself by pitting the three different factions that would love to conquer them against each other. And then consider that even Laterano itself recently course-corrected to be more connected to the rest of the world, after seeing the massive advancements other nations made, threatening to make some of Laterano's blessings a relic of the past. This is starting to sound a lot less like it's about salvation and more about socioeconomic theory, isn't it? There's a lot more we could get into, and maybe we will one day, but I'll spare you for now. I think this is enough context to understand a philosophy on salvation that Laterano is often known for. The Sancta are blessed. These blessings allow them to ensure a level of fulfillment, dignity, and luxury that truly make them a paradise. However, their only limitation is that while their joys might be infinite, the people who can receive them are finite. Put another way, Laterano will happily save those who belong in Laterano, but that salvation is thinner the less you belong. There's a lot to unpack there, but I think it helps if you keep this philosophy in mind. Ultimate joy and salvation, the only requirement is belonging. And it'll become a lot easier to understand Laterano's actions in broad strokes. Here, let's put that to the test. I'll just stir vaguely at a few things. You keep what I just said in mind, and tell me if you find it easier to empathize with Laterano. I'll just stir at Anduin, who revolted with the Pathfinders because he believed Laterano far too complacent. Even if there are limits to how many they can save, he couldn't help but be disgusted at the idea that, when his village was destitute and in need of salvation, Laterano offered it to him, but denied it to the non-sancta of his village, despite them being a village of Liberia devoted to the Lateran faith. I'll gesture at the alienists, the falling, the errati, or even the mute venini. So much of Laterano's support system is simply incapable of accommodating certain differences in thought, like how Paganini discovered child psychology books being practically useless if parent and child weren't haloed. I'll gesture at the Liberi, saved, loved, and accepted in many important ways, but still not Sankta, and therefore not Latering in many others. And finally, I'll gesture at something of a counterpoint, at the missionaries and diplomats Laterano sends across Terra. Even if you cynically point out that the system began only after an isolationist Laterano saw omens of its own destruction in the War of the Four Emperors, there are still Sankta, like Arturia's late mother, willing to sacrifice their own lives to help others. Just like there are men like Oring who, well, let's not get into it. The point is, I don't want you thinking that even the haloed Sankta are on monolith. There certainly are Sankta who look far past their borders and their people. And call me a classic Halo you must, but I genuinely do still admire Laterano. I do consider a lot of the work they do to be worthy of the highest praise. I mentioned earlier that it's their resources and their culture that make them a paradise after all. Though there are flaws in their beliefs of belonging, flaws that I believe should not simply be accepted, it's hard to look at their constitution, their education system, or yes, even their diplomatic work and not understand that there is so much to take pride in. But again, our report today is still about how and why we fail to offer salvation. So now that we've finished setting our plate, let's dig in.
I know you all have your own beliefs at Rhodes Island, too. Here's hoping we don't come into direct conflict one day, Doctor.
So, often Laterano simply won't try to save those that fall outside of its banner, but that's not really failing to save someone. So how do they fail when they do try? One of the simplest ways we fail is just that we fail to understand what the person we're saving really wants. There's this cute little phrase we teach children sometimes, the golden rule to treat others how you'd like to be treated. An important first step, and one that people still fumble on admittedly, but still, it has some obvious limitations. Even if we're more alike than we are different, we still are individuals. Consider Fiammetta and Paganini. Both of these Liberi suffer from rifts with their Sankta friends, and both are limited in how they can interact with patron firearms despite their immense skill. When Patrizion Pozzo looks at their situation, he genuinely wants to help. After all, he cares deeply for his granddaughter and his friend. And yet, he fails to see their discontent from their perspective. So to him, the solution was first impossible, and then when the saint arrived, it was obvious. They simply needed to be giving halos, to be made Sankta who could interact with and sense the world like he does. It's obvious. He isn't able to understand why, then, they so vehemently reject the wondrous gift being offered. He had been forced to part ways with his wife, with his apprentice, with his friends. Again and again, he had to turn his back on people he loved because of the previous limitation of halos. This was finally a solution to that. Why couldn't they see it? He sees it as just something else his Liberi loved ones failed to understand because they don't have halos, because they aren't whole as Laterings. But I think the truth is simpler. They don't want halos because if they have to fundamentally change to be accepted and understood, they're not being accepted or understood. They're just being turned into something that's easier for Laterano to understand. Like, would things be easier if Fiammetta could use a guardian gun? Probably. But she's never really seen firearms as anything but tools, and she's happy to be able to spec out the ones she can use. She's even proud that she isn't so emotionally attached to her weapons that she can easily mod them, unlike her Sankta friends. Would Paganini, the Liberi gunsmith, be better off if he could commune with guns? Arguably not. Even though he's dealt with pity and underestimation all of his life because of it, he himself doesn't even care to be able to hear or fire them. And though his approach differs wildly from Sankta gunsmiths, his process, one that his schoolmates treated with pity, is in no way inferior. After all, as the king of gunsmiths, he's literally created weapons that generations of Sankta smiths have only dreamed about. Ironically, the future the Dreamlands offered both of them would have banned the very gun shops that let them express themselves. By assuming they needed to interact with guns just like the Sankta do, they were stripping away their ability to interact with guns the way they wanted to. Similarly, Patrizion sees Halos as a cure to his fears that he couldn't be close to the people he cared about. But Fia would be happy with him just choosing to watch another movie with her. Being part of the Gun Knights and having a patron firearm were important to him, but Fiammetta has her own paths, her own joys, and her own troubles. As for Paganini, a halo might have helped soften the symptoms of their rift, but one look at Amos is proof enough that a halo would have never been the solution to it. But maybe that all seems overly emotional to you. After all, if they were born with halos, they'd have been integrated into the Laterans society more easily, and a lot of complexities in their lives could be solved. So if they can have halos now, why shouldn't they? There's nothing bad about having a halo like their Sankta friends, is there? I'll give you my answer, but first let me tell you about two more people. Another Liberi and a Sankta. Hildegard, or Archetto, is a Liberian nun of the Landing Monastery. It's not well known, often seen as an ornament of Laterano, but she loves it as much as she loves Laterano. She works incredibly hard to show the world why she's so proud of it, and for Laterano to share that pride. The Dreamland showed her a world where the monastery was respected, and she'd be offered a halo to truly be a part of the Laterano she loved. Of course, if that's salvation, then all the love and work she'd put in was never enough to be truly Lateran. Meanwhile, Benini is Pag's apprentice and adopted daughter. She's a Sankta, but spent her early life without a halo. You see, Sankta gained their halo upon their first word, and she was born mute. Pag even taught her a symbolic language based on bully caissons for her to communicate with him. She would eventually start to speak, but is limited to small, simple sentences, and still uses her special language with Pag when the two of them want to get something important across. The Dreamland showed her a world where her speech impediment was completely removed, and the bullet casings Pag left on the table were just things to be discarded. If that's salvation, the communication they had wasn't even worth remembering. So maybe you have your own answer, but I promised you mine. There's nothing wrong with the lives they could have had if everyone had the same halos. But those aren't their lives. Lives they found love, joy, and purpose in. As in cases like Pag, I think it's incredibly clear how these different lives strengthen and add value to the whole. I think it's fair to say that many of the innovations he made were because he lacked a halo, not in spite of it. Especially since, and this might be controversial, halo empathy just isn't as powerful as some make it out to be. It's just another form of sense, like the sight that lets you see expressions on someone's face. Many conflicts demonstrably wouldn't be solved in any meaningful way by halos, but could be solved with enough mundane effort. Their halos are just as often blinding as they are a guiding light to the Sankta. But because the halo is such an obvious difference, there's a tendency to not even try to put in the mundane effort, if they can just blame a rift on the difference in halos. There's a temptation to write it off as an impossibility unless those without functioning halos can be cured. And obviously at this point, I don't need a halo for you to guess that I think more focus should be given to accommodating people's needs and differences. But, well, admittedly, things aren't that simple either, I'll admit. The Saints' idea of salvation isn't without merit or support. Some Liberi likely do desire halos. Hell, as a fledgling I had my own reasons to wish for one. And as a Rhode Island, part of our ideal world is one where oripathy doesn't take away Aya's senses. If halos are simply a kind of sense, one that some people are deprived of, is that not something worth curing? In some cases, salvation does come in the form of cures and not accommodations, so how do we untangle that? And that is complicated, but first off, I'll note that as much as we love either-or situations, there's no actual need to choose. Even with oripathy, we've championed for both better medicine and accommodation, like allowing the infected to be treated equally by the Knights Clubs of Cajemirs. If nothing else, I'd say a good place to start is asking the people you're trying to save what they want, how they feel. It reminds me of something I heard from Bobbin. When asked about advocating for a group of Sarkaz refugees, he said, "Admitting you don't understand them is the greatest form of respect." But even that doesn't stop you from needing to make judgment calls, of course, because after all, maybe the people you want to save simply don't understand what's best for them, not like you do. That's a dangerous line of thought that has corrupted many well-intentioned organizations, and yet, well, let's dig into it.
Our organization aims to help people live better lives, but I don't believe that gives us the right to dictate what a better life is.
So now we assume that you do want to help someone, and you've even taken the time to understand what they have to say about the situation. What if when you hear what their idea of salvation is, you simply disagree? There are times when this is valid, but let's look into some of the uglier ways of thinking that'll lead to this problem. What if the reason you disagree is because they need salvation? After all, you're in a position to help them, so that must mean you're superior. If they're doing something differently than you would, that must mean they're doing it wrong. If you know best, the best thing they can do is listen and fall in line. Whatever distress you cause to get them to fall in line is then for their own good. Let's put a face to this kind of thinking. The Saint was a kind, merciful, and loving person. Even as Lemuel riddled her with bullets, she desperately wanted to reach out and cradle her. I'll talk about ignorance and corruption a lot, and I know that brings certain images to mind of two-faced sociopaths. But I think it's important to understand that good people with good intentions can hurt people, even as they're trying to reach out and help. Look, the Saint's dreamland was, I believe, created out of ignorance and corrupted ideals. And her ignorance, towards the end, was undeniably willful, as she treated Exusiai's barrage of defiance as nothing more than a child's tantrum to be ignored. But it's important to see the parts of her heart and her beliefs that were good. People are complicated as the world we live in. That said, again, we're here to focus on her failures today. Having found her own salvation through the law, she was blind to the value of what she was destroying to offer that same salvation again. It reminds me of Iger, when they rose from the sea with their fantastical technology and brazenly broadcast a message to all of Terra that we put aside our petty squabbles, submit to their enlightened rule, and commit ourselves to the fight against the Seaborn. Or to give some less apocalyptic examples, it reminds me of Victoria, first in Eliseo. He's known for his gentle quiet when he's listening to the worries of others, and his passionate fury as he advocates for their dignity is just as admirable. Looking at his resume, you'd think he's always been the man we see today. And it's not like he ever had what I'd call a sordid past. I'd say it's more that he needed to crash against reality to readjust the reasons he went into social work. You see, he was an academic with barely enough wealth to share a university with the truly wealthy, but still poor enough he had to swallow his pride and pick up the secondhand equipment they tossed to the ground while praising themselves for the charity. Unable to bear the humiliation, he decided to become a social worker for the infected in Londinium, because then he would be surrounded by those who would rely on his charity. He could stand above them as a savior, his pride restored. In his mind, it would be a simple thing to share his university knowledge with the poorly educated and get things in order for them. But all that knowledge about what the best way to do things failed to teach him why people did things the wrong way to begin with. Like, how the infected weren't too stupid to see the dangers of grey market suppressants, but when paying rack to their bodies, they chose to risk their tomorrow to survive today. Suffice to say that he learned reaching out a hand in arrogance steals away the dignity of others, no matter what you drop at their feet in exchange. The story of what exactly changed in views in Londinium is an interesting one, but I'll stop there for now. Because I also want time to mention Vina and the people who wanted her to become Queen of Victoria, who wanted her to take over and become their savior. Because I don't think that it's just the people who would be in power that are tempted by the idea of a savior. For those desperate for relief, purpose, and hope, for those terrified of making another choice, of making another step and sinking even deeper if they make the wrong choice. The idea that someone better and more powerful can simply save them if they loyally follow behind them is seductive. I imagine in the same way that the saint was seductive to all those that had followed her procession. And while there's nothing wrong with, say, following a leader whose vision you admire, I think there's a subtle but important difference between that and giving blind faith to a savior. But then, am I being a hypocrite? I just said how important it is to listen to the wants of those you would help. If they want a savior, am I not being arrogant and holding my beliefs as superior? Yeah, I probably am. Because just as suffering doesn't inherently make people lesser, it also doesn't inherently make their hearts any more noble. It's easier if we treat the strongest among us as saints and fall in line. It's easier if the people in need of help always have a perfectly moral and sound idea of what they want. But the reason both of those realities would be easier is because the realities where complex choices are boiled down to an obvious right or wrong. You might be tired of hearing this, but as always, I don't think there's a single philosophy that will tell you the correct choice to make at every fork in your life. I only ask that you never deny that you can choose, and to do so consciously. Because no choice that matters should be made with anything other than clear eyes, an open mind, and a feeling heart. And if it ever becomes too much, know that there will always be people to give you a hand, to give you a moment of rest until you're ready again. After all, I think Exusia would agree with me that that's where the power of prayer comes from. From a young age, she knew all about the studies that proved prayer doesn't heal anyone on its own, but like many Laterans, she still does pray. Because through prayer we reaffirm those we care about and the good we wish for them. It's still up to us, though, to let those feelings move us towards actually helping them. It can also be a form of personal salvation, like the gentle peace that inspired Grace Bear to become a nun in Bolivar. Of course, as Anduin found, that tranquility is a rest stop, not a destination. He too found tranquility in prayer, just like he found tranquility in the dream of the Nativity. It was so incredibly tempting to remain there, to avoid hardship and seek comfort, just like the saints said all people yearn for. But the tranquility of angels isn't something we're supposed to stay in forever. Just long enough to find or judge our path, and then we need to wake and walk again. And, well, thank you for walking with me, Doctor. I do so much appreciate your time and your indulgence. Until next time, good evening, Doctor.
Lord, please bless the leader with a long and wonderful dream, and let that dream come true someday.
Oh, it actually looks like there's one more set of notes here. Let's see. Guard and Greythroat. How was I planning to tie them? Oh. Jeez. Okay, I guess this is important. Really important, actually. Really depressing, though. Okay, you know what? We've wandered far enough from Laterano on our talk already, so let me give you a taste of what's to come, and then we'll put a pin in things. Sometimes people, even people you're desperately trying to help, do awful things. You'll become part of a tragedy, and the only meaningful choice you'll have is not succumbing to despair in the aftermath. Because even if we do everything right, we have to come to terms with the fact that when we reach out to people, especially those in the severe situations we tend to deal with, it's always a moment of mutual trust. They risk being hurt by us, true, but we also risk being hurt by them. How we navigate that is complicated, ugly, and uncomfortable. Hence, we'll look into it next time. I hope you'll stick around if you'd like to see that. Alternatively, I plan on releasing a few short and light-hearted things in celebration of the BeyondHalo event, if you want to get a taste for that. Speaking of, I'll likely be finishing this right at the deadline, so if you found our talks worthwhile, I'd appreciate the support of your vote when voting opens. The funds would be a welcome way of covering the cost of a particular uniform upgrade that I think would greatly bolster morale on the landship. I guess one last thing. If you were offered a halo during all of this, would you have accepted it? Did your answers change as the events progressed? If they did, what was the line for you? Think it over and let me know in the morning. Until then, good night, Doctor.